Well, good evening. My name is Richard Stursberg. I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to talk about a slightly more gloomy subject. I'm going to talk about cultural sovereignty. So what is cultural sovereignty? Cultural sovereignty is the ability to ensure that a country's media are capable of reflecting the country to itself. A country's books, TV, film, newspapers, and social media are the key instruments for exploring and understanding its history, values, sense of humor, dreams, mistakes, and moments of greatness. They are the foundations of national identity. In many ways, cultural sovereignty is the most important of all the sovereignties. When it's weakened or swamped by the media of others, a country's ability to know itself erodes, and its determination to preserve its independence. This is the situation English Canada finds itself in today. Our media is the weakest it has ever been. Historically, Canadian governments treated cultural sovereignty as a key element of the public agenda. The government of Pierre Trudeau ensured that the broadcasting system, radio, TV, and cable was owned and controlled by Canadians. It created tax arrangements that ensured Canadian advertising revenues would stay in Canada and finance Canadian media, including newspapers, magazines, and television. The Mulroney government strengthened Canadian ownership of book publishing, attempted to do so for film, and famously exempted the media from the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. The result of those policies were thriving newspaper, magazine, television, and radio businesses. We can all remember when newspapers were the thickness of a salami. The television news was an important part of everyone's day. Magazines like Maclean's and Chatelaine were central to the public conversation, and everyone read Margaret Atwood and Mordecai Richler's new books. Now, that is largely gone. For the last 20 years, through the mandates of Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau, the Canadian government has reneged on its obligation to protect and strengthen our cultural sovereignty, and with it, our national identity. When Google and Netflix started selling ads in Canada, the governments allowed the tax advantages that had previously applied only to Canadian firms to apply to them. The money that had previously gone to support Canadian news, drama, comedies, and kids' shows poured into the coffers of Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and the other elf lords of Silicon Valley. Current estimates indicate that almost 2/3 of all Canadian advertising revenue now goes south. Later, when Netflix started broadcasting in Canada, the Harper and Trudeau governments allowed it to do so, despite the law explicitly requiring broadcasters to be Canadian-owned. They permitted all the streamers, Disney, Apple, Amazon, to operate here, contributing nothing to Canada. The Harper government campaigned against the Netflix tax, while the Canadian broadcasters not only had to pay tax, but also had to spend 50% of their gross revenues on Canadian content. The result is the wasteland we see today. The newspapers that survive, and scores have gone under, are shriveled fragments of their former selves, as are the magazines. The big private broadcast groups are in significant financial difficulty and have been losing money for 15 years. The Canadian publishers now take less than 5% of the domestic market. Viewing of Canadian shows has collapsed. The local and national news have lost about 40% of their viewers. Most young Canadians have disconnected from Canadian TV altogether, relying exclusively on the foreign streamers for their entertainment. Nor do they read Canadian newspapers or magazines, subscribing instead to TikTok, X, YouTube, and Facebook, all of which are stewards of misinformation. As Canada loses its ability to see itself and hear its own voice, it is perhaps not surprising that pride in the country has withered. 30 years ago, 80% of Canadians said that they were very proud to be Canadian. Now it's down to about 35%, with younger Canadians even less enthusiastic. Prime Minister Carney claims he wants to reverse these trends. He recognizes that Canada needs to reassert its own identity. Canadians agree. Whether in English Canada or French Canada, they have recoiled in dismay at Trump's bullying and attacks. There may never be a better time to recover our cultural sovereignty, but it will be hard. The rot is far gone. The Harper and Trudeau government's failures to defend Canadian cultural sovereignty makes it harder. Sovereignty not exercised grows weaker. There are two great initiatives before us that will determine, at least in part, whether we can rebuild our media. The CRTC has ruled that the streamers must spend 5% of their gross revenues on Canadian shows, not the 50% required of the major broadcast groups. The streamers have appealed the decision and asked the courts to strike it down. If they lose, they will ask Trump to intervene. The government has also indicated that it will reintroduce the Online Harms Act. The big social media companies will object. They have already torn down the limited arrangements that they had in place to monitor hate speech and disinformation. If the government acts to limit what can be carried on their platforms, they too will ask Trump to intervene. It's hard to see the government having the backbone to take on the Americans. It has already caved to Trump's pressure on the digital services tax. He will surely insist that Canada keep its hands off the big American streamers and social media companies. It's happened before. When the first Canadian-U.S. trade agreement was signed, Ronald Reagan told Mulroney that he could have a free trade deal or a film bill to strengthen the Canadian cinema industry. He really had no choice. Thanks very much.